We are joined by Curtis Yarvin, a writer and American monarchist, and he's going to talk to us about the Trump moment and also Hollywood and the arts. I have to start. You are a self-styled American monarchist. Is this a great time to be an American monarchist?
Sure, although we have to distinguish very carefully between two types of American monarchists. There's the old-fashioned kind of ceremonial monarchist who loves the pageantry, the crown jewels, the tabloids, all of the sort of crown Kardashian, aspect of the monarchy. There's nothing wrong with it, but I have very little interest in that. My interest is in real monarchy, which is simply, literally, according to the meaning of the word, the rule of one person. And in case you're unfamiliar with the idea, you will note that everything that we have in this world that works is in general made by a corporation, and every corporation is a monarchy. As we've been learning, seeing, Elon Musk, a very, very practiced monarchist, come in, or practicing monarchist, although not at all a theoretical monarchist, come in and try to run Washington, D.C. from the top down.
How successfully do you think he is performing his role?
I think he's, at this point, he's about... somewhere between 0.5% and 1.5% successful, but it's only been a few weeks.
I think maybe for our audience, you should go slightly deeper into really what your sort of core concern is when you refer to monarchy in the modern age. And how it sort of how you differentiate that from the sort of constitutional monarchy that maybe we have here in Britain, and really what you want from leadership and why. I mean, aren't democracies perfect? Haven't they created all of this freedom and flourishing?
Well, for a quick refresher on all the political science you need to know, there are only three forces of government. There is monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy: the rule of the one, the rule of the few, the rule of the many. And if you want to translate the words oligarchy and democracy into the present language, and you're confused about which is which, there's a simple way to say it. Translate the word oligarchy into the word meritocracy, and translate the word democracy into the word populism. And what you'll see is that these two forces that are in conflict today, are in many ways simply oligarchy has laid claim to the word democracy. It's also laid claim to the word monarchy because actually you refer to England as a constitutional monarchy. I don't agree at all. England is a ceremonial monarchy. For example, I would say that England was actually, or Great Britain was actually England at this time was actually a constitutional monarchy between 1660 and 1688. That was the period during which the power of Parliament and the King was actually balanced, and they were both genuine contending forces. Of course, in 1688, you have this Dutch invasion, and that was really the last of that.
Glorious.
And so, for example, if there are any Americans watching this, most Americans don't know that King Charles III has the same power of vetoing legislation on paper that President Trump has. And Luke, do you know the last time that power was used?
No, I don't.
It was in the reign of Queen Anne. I believe Queen Anne used it once. In 1705 or something like that. So, the thing is, on paper, you can have one power structure, but what matters is not on paper power, as the great German political philosopher Carl Schmitt once said, power is habitual obedience. And so, essentially, I would say probably Charles III, somewhat of a Marxist in his youth, I believe. Probably the Charles III has had the occasional thought, oh, I could veto that. And then he was just like, well, but nobody would have the habit of obeying my veto, so they would just take the power away. I actually think he could, but I also don't think he's going to. And so what you're seeing in the U.S. today, of course, very different system. The U.S. presidency was essentially designed to make George Washington a monarch, and because Americans realized that they actually needed that. And the last American president who was truly a monarch, who was truly the CEO of Washington, D.C., was Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt, of course, passes away in 1945. I'm pretty sure if they'd found a way of making him live forever, he would still be president in 2045. But the technology just wasn't there, right? And since 1945, the U.S. has been essentially an oligarchy, because it's essentially been the state, the personal monarchy that FDR established without the head. So along comes Donald Trump, who learned through bitter experience from 2017 to 2020 that he was not actually the president, and that he was just supposed to be a figurehead, a log king, as Carlyle once put it, and preside over this system that did not need him. Anyone in D.C. will tell you that Washington would work just fine without the White House, if not better. Along he comes, occupies the White House, and to everyone's surprise, including certainly mine, he aligns with this fellow Elon Musk, who is the world's most effective working monarch today. The Napoleon of rocket ships, the Napoleon of electric cars, the Napoleon of brain-computer interfaces, what am I missing, digging tunnels, et cetera, and decides that actually it should be possible to use the presidency as this, to actually be the chief executive of the executive branch, like it says in the Constitution. And Americans are like, whoa, Americans, especially of the ruling the PMC class, as some call them, are like, that's not allowed. The president can't be the chief executive of the executive branch. There must be some mistake. And, but what he's trying to do is sort of like by running Washington from out of the White House, it's rather as if, someone had left an old bicycle out in the rain since 1945. And, it's a very sacred bicycle. They pose with it. They lift it over their heads. They even slip it between their legs, and here he is. And he's getting on the bicycle and he's trying to ride it, and what the hell is going to happen with that? Is the chain going to break? Is the stem going to break? We don't really know that. And so, this is why some Americans are calling this a constitutional crisis. But what you're also seeing is that, the inertia of the existing system is very great, but its actually will to defend itself is very, very weak, which is exactly what we saw in the fall of the Soviet Union. So I think it's much too early to declare victory in any sense there. And it's not simply enough to, swing a wrecking ball through the old regime. You actually need a new regime, and you need to know, when you cross the Rubicon, it's not just about crossing the Rubicon. You've got to know where you're going. Like, where's Rome? Are you going to Rome? Are you going to Naples? Are you going to Cape Town? What are you doing after this little river? And I'm not really clear that there's a map of that. But, in his first term with all of his rhetoric, Trump was essentially fishing in the Rubicon. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to dip my toe in a little bit. See, wow, Rubicon, And, that turned out to not work very well for him. He really got attacked very, very strongly because he talked loudly and carried a small stick. Donald Trump will never talk softly. It is not in his nature to talk softly. But it seems that this time, I'm quoting Teddy Roosevelt, the great Roosevelt, the real Roosevelt. But this time he seems to have brought the stick. And so, he just passed an executive order declaring himself the living Constitution. I jest, of course. He just passed an executive order saying that the executive branch needs to interpret the Constitution in the same way that he does. And it can't just say, we're at the Department of Justice, the esteemed organization that does justice things, and the norms and practices of the Department of Justice are, we can tell the president to sod off, and they asserted that, and then the next day they all found themselves fired and locked out of the office.
This is just it. So we've spoken at length before about the deep state. And you have lots of theories and ideas about what that actually is, how that sort of came into being. Is there a hope of Trump dismantling this? I mean, is that what he's taking the wrecking ball to, or is that something else?
Well, it's far dismantling it. First of all, we're far from any notion of dismantling it, and dismantling it is not the real problem. The real problem is replacing it. Because if you were going to build a new government from scratch, you essentially would not start with the system that was there. Let's say you just put Elon Musk in charge of NASA, for example. The American rocket program established by Americans in 1945 to build rockets. I think you would reuse many of the facilities and many of the personnel of NASA. But really, if you wanted to just do that, you would say, hey, Elon Musk, here's all this NASA stuff. Here's all these people, and many of them are damn good people. Here's $20 billion a year. Go do fun space stuff. The goal of NASA being to do fun space stuff. And I'm pretty sure you'd get a lot more fun space stuff. But if you basically say, how do you reorganize NASA, as it is, I mean, you're trying to untangle the Gordian knot, and there are all of these Washington is one big Gordian knot. It turns out that the Gordian knot has been sitting out in the rain for 80 years, and it's somewhat frayed, and you start yanking on it, and, these big, thick ropes just come apart very, very easily. And, so canceling, trying to, because he's in a fight with the courts, trying to dissolve USAID, this remarkable world, octopus of what I call missionary imperialism, is something that nobody anticipated, and he just pulls on it. And it's not like USAID, is going to have, screaming mobs on the street in Georgetown, basically besieging the Capitol. No, Trump got, mobs besieging the Capitol, if anyone remembers, in, I think it was 2019, 2020, and when he was acting very weakly. And now that he's acting very strongly, there's 30 boomers, marching with pre-printed signs. Strong action provokes much less opposition than weak action. And that's really something that they grasp.
And you've seen that happening. The response has been pretty muted to Trump.
It's been incredibly muted. And so you have this, the whole theory of, stimulus response, would tell you that if you act, I think it's no exaggeration to say he's acting 100 times as strongly as he did in his first term, and the resistance is 100 times as weak. And it reminds me, there's an old British idiom that most Americans don't know called grasping the nettle. Do people still say grasping the nettle in this country? It turns out that a nettle has stinging hairs on it, and if you brush it lightly, it will give you quite a painful sting. But if you really grab it, you'll compress the hairs and they can't hurt you. Don't try this at home, kids.
Give it a go,
Do it for a YouTube video at least. If you try it, film it. He's grasped the nettle. The question is, you can't stop when you're doing that. You can't stop in the middle of the Rubicon. As Saint-Just said, he who makes half a revolution digs his own grave. And so you've really got to sort of continue on to the point where, when these people see their dissolution approaching, they will behave the way the Stasi did in 1990. There will be oh, it's over. And, the people at the Ministry of State Security in East Berlin in 1990, in the course of a month, went from we're the most powerful and important people in our country to, it's over, we'll just collect our pensions.
Before I ask you about Hollywood and the arts, I do have a niggling question. Is this possible in Europe?
I think it's actually in some ways even more possible in Europe. I think that in Europe, essentially, let's take Brexit, for example. What a shit show. Complete shit show. And, the reason it was a shit show is it's like, they're like, well, let's exit from this, European Commission thing. Just frankly, as an American, I got to tell you guys, the EU is about as European as the Warsaw Pact was Polish. And so...
By which you mean it's an American invention.
Yes. This is just basic history. It's an American invention, right? And its strength comes from being part of that world. And, the possibility that Donald Trump, by doing things like canceling USAID, he's talking about drawing down troops in Germany, maybe even ending the occupation of Germany, right? What message do you think that says to the AfD, to Germans? It's one thing to sort of talk loudly about conservative values the way Ronald Reagan did. Europeans responded to that and said, America's going temporarily insane. There's a bunch of barbarians taking over, but, our real masters in Harvard and the State Department and the New York Times, are still there, and we still report to them, and, we'll just be like more American than the Americans, by which we'll say, oh, we're European and anti-American. One of the big things that all non-Americans should know is that there's nothing more American than anti-Americanism. In general, what you see, what you call anti-Americanism, you're just aping the hatred of the American elite for their own peasants. And so, when the peasant comes into power in Washington or comes into office in Washington, it's like, well, the real America of the New York Times is still there. The real America of USAID is still there. Suddenly, when you start like blowing up USAID and canceling all these people's funding, USAID seems to have been funding basically the entire independent media of Eastern Europe. I'm using the word. I can't tell which is more Orwellian here, the use of the word independent or the use of the word democracy. They're both pretty strong. Let's not forget that the legal name of North Korea is the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That's 3 euphemisms for democracy and 1 place name. And, just because you call something European doesn't mean it is. So, in Brexit, Englishmen were like, we're tired of, this European Commission thing ruling over us in an unaccountable way. We'd much rather transfer our unaccountable power back to Whitehall. Let's go back to Yes Minister, England, and not back to, Yes Commissioner England. And where do we go from that? You put 1 foot in the Rubicon. You didn't move from there, and instead what you got is I believe you used the term the Boris wave. You got the Boris wave, which was exactly the opposite of what you wanted. You got basically sort of more shit show, and the problem is you kind of tried to have a symbolic revolution in a way, which was well intended, but you had no idea where you were going, right? There was no like, oh, are you going to restore the British Empire? Of course not. Who would think that, right? And so when Donald Trump comes out and he says to England, to France, to Germany, you can have any government you want, sort of an American Gorbachev doctrine. And he's like, you know what? We actually don't really care how France is governed. You could have an anarchist people's collective. The whole country could go gay. You could do a Vichy France 2.0, what is it? Work, family, country. Whatever. We'll still buy your wine. The wine won't change. If the wine starts to suck, then we might get a little upset.
Don't tempt the French in sort of trying to set up a new constitution.
A new what? I was just speaking to a Frenchman. Apparently you have a very powerful president over there in France. You have Jupiterian powers. And so, the ease of actually, appointing one man to clean up France, and I mean that, quite literally, really, is not really all that difficult. And it's possible. It could be done, and when, the American... I hesitate to say Quislings because I don't want to soil the good name of Vidkin Quisling, but when our people in France feel that they have no support coming from America, they remember that they're men without chests, and they basically grow weak and disheartened. And the people in France who would like to clean up France, maybe even, we have this amazing thing called the Third World. Do you know what the Third World is? The Third World is we stole your colonies and wrecked them. And like. What's the the Larkin poem? The places we kept safe, must keep themselves safe, for lack of money. You must know the poem. I'm not reciting it accurately. It wasn't for lack of money. It was because the State Department was telling them, it was because of 56 when Eisenhower screams at Eden over the phone and tells them that if he tries to keep the empire alive in Egypt, he's going to cut off the oil.
The great American betrayal.
Great American betrayal. That's not going to happen this time, right? And so, for patriotic Englishmen to realize that, the old tiger has lost its teeth, that, Uncle Sam's 6-shooters are out of bullets, that Uncle Sam himself is Joe Biden and he can barely raise the weapon, let alone shoot it. That's the reality, and people tend to eventually pick up on realities. And go on. So the question is is there an Englishman who can pick up that opportunity? I mean, Charles III could do it tomorrow, but he won't.
We could have so someone needs to call up the king, and perhaps we need a Cromwell figure. Thomas.
Yeah. Well,
before you get any ideas,
I'd like to think you could combine the best of Thomas and Oliver, and that would be a great English tradition, really. But here's another option. Might know. England still has a legitimate king over the water. Actually, he's the first legitimate king to be born in England. How old is he now? Is he 20 or so? Is he, because the heir to the Stuart monarchy runs through Liechtenstein, and so which is actually a working monarchy. That's an option. In France, there's Louis the 20th. He's some kind of stockbroker or something. And there's also there's three, because you have heirs to the three French, monarchical traditions. You have an heir, to the true Bourbon line, the Orleans line, and the Bonapartist line. They're all out there. They're all waiting. They're all ready. Or are they ready? I don't know. But the thing is, basically, a real king is a real king. He could be a great CEO. He could be, but the opportunity to turn. England could be the mistress of the world again very easily. England under a real king could outcompete America so easily it would not even be funny. And one of the things I love when coming to London is to see all the subtle ways, and they're so subtle I can barely even describe it, but there are many, many subtle ways in which London is still the capital of the world, as it was for 100 years. And, say the word, I don't know. The crown is in the gutter, pick it up with your sword. What can I say?
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. We'll search for our Cromwell, I think. Maybe that's what we're doing here at this conference. I don't know. He will emerge. But, okay, fine. We're talking about power, but we know power doesn't just sort of emanate from, the pen of the politician. The people who produce our culture, who create our art, have an incredibly important role in shaping how we view ourselves, how we view our mission, how we view our civilization. Tell me a bit about that, and tell me a bit about what your hopes for Hollywood are.
Well, there's a fundamental asymmetry. Left and right are not and never have been symmetric. And part of the problem with conservatives, with the right in general, and all I mean by right, all anyone should mean by right, is the absence of left. And, the problem with essentially post-war conservatism is that it's interested in values, it's interested in rights, It's interested in being left alone. It's interested in everything except power. Whereas to be a leftist is really to have an addiction to power. I was seeing watching a speech by an American, Batya Ungar-Sargon, who is a recovering leftist, former Berkeley literature professor, and she talked about being a former leftist, and she said something which I've only heard from heroin addicts. She was like, "I miss it every day. I miss that feeling of needing to matter, wanting to matter. I miss it every day, and yet I know I should not have it." And so the thing is, you can't turn rightists into leftists. You can't turn them into people who think that way. You can't, put on, the ring of Sauron. And yet, if you're just fighting not to lose, you are fighting to lose, right? And so the sense of basically, how do you wield these weapons of power in a way that actually works is a really, really hard question. You can't become the left. You don't want to become the left. But actually, you're in a situation where the only question is, as Lewis Carroll said, who is to be master? And so, if you look at, for example, here's a great example. You've probably heard of the Gulf of America. What a masterful...
Very recently.
Very recently. What a masterful troll. And the natural conservative response is to basically be like, this is crazy. This is the stupidest and most embarrassing thing ever. This body of water has been known, as the Gulf of Mexico since Christopher Columbus was a little boy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What a vain, and weak act. And then you realize that basically the left has been doing this for its entire existence, and, renaming streets, renaming schools, renaming mountains, renaming everything. And each of these things is an act of power and an act of humiliation. And you're basically forced to accept this. You're required to call Mount McKinley, which is now Mount McKinley again, by the way, Denali, and, other such, strained, my favorite example is that in the small California town of Berkeley, or as you say here, Barclay. Actually, Berkeley is called Berkeley because the founders were admirers of Bishop Barclay, but being Americans, they had no idea how to pronounce his name. But if you set your Siri to an English accent, it will tell you to go to Barclay. There was a street named Grove Street, and it had to be renamed to Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, which is the classic American name for a street where you don't want to be. And unfortunately, a block away from this is King Street, which was called King Street since time immemorial. Imagine how many Uber rides this is screwed up, right? And so when you say, actually, no, it's the Gulf of America, and basically, that's the official name, and you're going to bend the knee, and let's see who bends the knee and who doesn't, and if you don't bend the knee, sorry, you can't come to the press conference. Actually, it's brilliant. And the only problem with it is that it's being done on too small a scale. And understanding that principle is understanding power. And so when we get back to the question of the media and the arts, of course, information, we live in the day when the pen is mightier than the sword, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, propaganda, or as some call it, psychological warfare, is the main tool of war today. And the way that you win is by using power over the arts and letters to turn money into power. And so the question of basically, you have this right that has no shortage of money, but that actually is sort of starting to realize that it wants power, but has no habitual and reflexive understanding of how to turn money into power. And turning money into power is the mother's milk of the left. And so you have a figure like Mackenzie, I forget her new old last name, Mackenzie Bezos, who walked away with half of Jeff Bezos' fortune and is just like, I'm going to give billions of dollars a year to this laundry list of organizations that are just going to, blow it on, whatever. And you sort of look at any attempt to do that on the right, and they're like, well, I don't know, young man, I like the cut of your jib, but $17,000, that's a lot of money, and it's like, you have to understand, you have to understand where that mentality comes from and respect it, because that mentality comes from a world which is the world of the right, and especially the world of the corporate right, where everything that's functional has its kind of own economic life and either funds itself or wants to fund itself. And things that just burn money are like evil, dire, losing, sad things that are going to basically, piss down a hole. So if you're basically talking to play the other side of this argument, if you're talking to an American venture capitalist, he's like, I'm not going to piss $17,000 down a hole. I'm not going to piss $17 million or $17 billion or even $17 down a hole, right? Whereas, Mackenzie Bezos is like, wee, I'm at the women's bathroom. I'm going to pee and pee and pee.
So we need a golden age, or we need a golden age of patrons. The Renaissance didn't happen without the Medicis.
And that can't be skin deep. They have to really understand very, very deeply what they're doing and how they're doing it and why. And I think that in some ways, the UK is a little more advanced than the US in that. If you look at the people who are sponsoring ARC, for example, they really get it at a cellular level. And I think one of the reasons why they get it at a cellular level in this country, and we don't in the US, is one of those deep ways in which London is still the capital of the world.
I think that leaves us with a lot more to talk about, and I definitely want to talk about that. So we'll have to do this again very soon, and it was really good to see you, and I'll see you tonight later on.